In section 9.5, we talk about the different types of skeletal muscle fibers, which has always been one of my favorite discussions in chapter 9. What we notice is this, that skeletal muscle fibers can be classified based on two different characteristics. One, the velocity at which they are able to shorten, which of course depends on the myosin isoform that's present. And number two, the ATP formation pathway. How are they making the ATP that they're using for muscle contraction? So based on shortening velocities, we divide muscles into slow and fast types of muscle fibers. And this, of course, is based on the ATPase activity of the myosin heads. So type 1 fibers, which are known as slow fibers, have the slower ATPase activity. Type 2 fibers, which are fast fibers, have about an ATPase activity that's about 4 times as fast as the type 1 fibers. Both of these fibers do generate about the same amount of force, though it's just that type 1 is much slower than is type 2. Now, as far as ATP formation goes, then we categorize muscle fibers into two different categories. One is the first, shown here, are oxidative fibers. These are fibers that are really good at making ATP, that primarily make their ATP via oxidative phosphorylation, as you would imagine. So they have many blood vessels, many mitochondria, and they have a high concentration of myoglobin, which is an oxygen-carrying protein similar to hemoglobin found in blood. And these features together give this type of muscle fiber a dark red color. Glycolytic fibers are the other category of fiber that is formed based on the ATP formation pathway. And so glycolytic fibers make most of their ATP using glycolysis, of course. And so there are a number of glycolytic enzymes as well as glycogen that's available there for energy. And there are few blood vessels present in these muscle fibers, a few mitochondria, and they tend to be white in color. So, based on these two categories, shortening velocity and ATP formation pathways, we form our different categories of muscle fibers. These are the categories of muscle fibers. We have three principal types of muscle fibers. Number one, we have type 1 muscle fibers, which are slow oxidative fibers. These are fibers that have slow myosin ATPase activity, and they have high oxidative capacity. And so these fibers are dark red in color, and these fibers tend to be a little bit smaller than the next two fibers that we'll talk about. Number two, we have fast oxidative glycolytic fibers, type 2 fibers. So these fibers have fast myosin ATPase activity, so the myosin heads undergo power strokes fairly rapidly. They have a high oxidative capacity and a medium glycolytic capacity. So in other words, much of their energy is made via oxidative phosphorylation, but they do utilize glycolysis to some extent to create ATP. The last type of muscle fiber, type 3, is in many ways the opposite of type 1. And so in this case, we have fast myosin ATPase activity and we have high glycolytic capacity. And these fibers also tend to be quite large relative to type 1 fibers. And so these are fibers that contract very rapidly and utilize glycogen as an energy source. So glycolytic fibers tend to be larger than oxidative fibers, and because they simply have more thick and thin filaments as a result of their larger size, they're able to generate more force. So let's take a look at this cross-section of a muscle, a skeletal muscle, and we see all three types of fibers shown very nicely here. So we have the slow oxidative fibers, which are labeled here, and you can see scattered throughout other portions of the picture. I'm pointing with the little cursor here. So you see these are dark red in color and relatively small. We see the type 2 fibers, which are the fast oxidative glycolytic fibers, shown here, and here, and here, and here. They're a little darker in color and a little bit larger in size relative to this fast oxidative fibers. And then we have the fast glycolytic fibers, which are the type 3 fibers. These are very large compared to, so here's a fast glycolytic fiber as I point with the cursor. Here is a slow oxidative fiber. So you see the vast difference in size between these two muscle fiber types, and you can see the difference in color as well. what we notice is that there's a great degree of difference in performance of these three muscle fiber types. So as we look at figure 925 from our text, which is shown here on the slide, what we notice is this: that slow oxidative fibers, shown here at the top in the green bars of our graph, have an ability to contract for long periods of time without fatiguing. You find large numbers of these fibers in muscles, for instance, like your back, which has to contract throughout the day to allow you to maintain an upright posture. So these fibers are very good at contracting for long periods of time without undergoing fatigue. What we see is that fast oxidative glycolytic fibers, type 2 fibers, demonstrate intermediate resistance to fatigue. And so they're not as good at fatigue resistance as our slow oxidative fibers, but they're not as bad. They don't fatigue as quickly as type 3, the fast glycolytic fibers. So we see this slow decline in tension that's generated as we go through time, noting that this is minutes on the x-axis and we're skipping a great deal of space there. So last, we have type 3 fibers, the fast glycolytic fibers. These guys fatigue extremely quickly, and so you'll notice after just a couple minutes, very little force is generated as a result of action potential sent down motor neurons to cause contraction of these fibers. These fibers are really good at causing contractions that generate a lot of force over a very short period of time, but they fatigue very rapidly as a result of the fact that the products of glycolysis, which they are using to create their ATP, are building up inside the cytoplasm and making it difficult for them to contract over sustained periods of time, as we discussed back in section 9.4.